When I moved to Memphis, Tennessee, a little bit over 40 years ago, I came down from central Missouri, and I knew nothing about the dish I'm going to share with you today. I remember eating it for the first time at the home of Clint and Sally Clausell. There it was in front of me, a big piping hot bowl, steam coming off of it, a big pat of melted butter in the middle, a little salt, a little pepper, and I instantly fell in love with the taste and texture of this southern staple. Welcome to All Things Food. I'm John Woods, and I love to cook, but I cook to love. And I really enjoy cooking side dishes. In this series of videos, we're going to explore some of the great side dishes that will go with any entree from A to Z. So let's talk food. With almost any dish, you have to have the right kind of equipment. So what kind of equipment do we use when we're cooking grits? I've seen people use crock pots, pressure cookers, rice cookers. They've cooked grits in the oven and the microwave. We're not going to confuse ourselves with all those things. We're going to do the very basic, traditional way of cooking grits. Every time I cook grits, I use a small saucepan or a larger pot, similar to this one here. Depending on the quantity that I'm cooking, if I'm cooking a small quantity, I'll use a small pan. If I'm cooking a big quantity, I'll use a much bigger pot. So we need a good cooking vessel. The second thing that we need would be a whisk, because we're going to be constantly stirring the grits. And get a whisk that's good. If you're using a nonstick pot or pan, get something that's not going to scratch it. But you want a whisk that's long enough to reach down to the bottom of the pan without running the risk of getting burned. The other thing you're going to need is a good lid, a tight-fitting lid, because we're going to cover these grits and let them simmer for a little bit. Now, if you don't have a lid for your pan, improvise maybe a plate. You have to be real careful with that, or a piece of foil or a small cooking sheet. Whatever you can do to seal in that steam as you're cooking. So a good lid. And then, of course, obviously, you need a heat source, whether it's an electric stove, a gas stove. You need a good heat source to control the heat and to keep those grits right at a simmer throughout the cooking process. So that's step number one. That's pretty easy. Now, what about step number two? You need the proper ingredients. Well, obviously, we need grits. Now, what kind of grits do we need? Again, we're not going to debate that today. So many varieties available. In fact, I was at the grocery store yesterday looking, and I mean, there were probably 10 different varieties. We have the stone ground grits or the old-fashioned grits, which would be my preference, my favorite. When I'm in a big hurry, I'll use the quick grits. You can use yellow grits, white grits, on and on and on. So again, the preference is yours, whichever grits that you want to use. Second part of the ingredient equation here is you need a good liquid. Traditionally, when we cook grits, we use water. That's what most people actually use. But there are all sorts of liquids we can use. We can use chicken broth. I've seen people use beef broth, vegetable broth. We can use milk, heavy cream, half and half. Or the wonderful thing about this is we can use a combination of any of these together. We can use half milk, half cream, half chicken stock, half cream, and you get the picture. And then we have what I call our secondary ingredients, or our ingredients that add flavor to our grits. That would be obviously salt, pepper. No dish is good without salt and pepper. And then butter. You have to have butter. And then I have all these other ingredients that we could possibly use. Chicken bouillon you can put in there to give it that little extra flavor. Or you have roasted chicken base. This is wonderful. You can buy this at most stores. Put a little bit of that in there, and that's going to kick that flavor up just a little bit. Or maybe if you're making a particular kind of grits dish and you want a Cajun flair, you might use some blended seasonings that maybe have a Cajun profile to them, or a southwestern, or whatever you want to do. So you have these secondary seasonings that you put in with your grits and with your liquid. So far this has been very, very simple. So what's the next step? The next step is we're going to take all these ingredients, the grits, the liquid, the seasonings, and we're going to mix them all together. Now, how are we going to do that? Well, one, we're going to do it in a pot here. And we're going to take our liquid, and today I'm going to use actually a mixture of water and heavy cream. So I use 2.5 cups of water and 2.5 cups of cream, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And that's going to be my liquid. I'm going to pour it into my pot, and we're going to bring this up to a boil. As soon as it gets to a boil, we're going to let it simmer down, and then we're going to add our grits. So let's bring it up to a boil. We brought our liquid up to a boil, and those of you astute viewers will say, well, you started out with a small pot, and now you have a big pot on the stove. Well, that's a very good observation. Well, we decided we like grits so much, we decided we're going to make double our recipe. So now here's the good part about it. Where do we start? What do we do from here? So let's go ahead and stir our grits in. And there is a little technique to this. One, you don't want to stir them in all at one time. Because if you do, they're going to clump together. And once they clump together, it's almost impossible to do anything with them. So we're going to take our whisk, we're going to get them up here, and we're going to stir them in, and we're going to stir and stir and stir. Now, if I dump these all in at one time, I'd have a real mess on my hands. I'm going to keep stirring. This is kind of, we're going to multitask here a little bit. Makes it kind of fun, I think, to do that. I'm going to put in a little bit of salt over here. I'm going to take my butter and my fat, put that in, and we say how much butter? Well, how much do you want? I don't think you can put too much in. So we're going to put our butter in there. And I want a little bit of this chicken, roasted chicken base to go in mine. So I'm going to put a spoon of that in. Again, it's how much do I want? Stir all that together. I'm going to put a lid on this. I'm going to reduce the heat down a little bit. Put a lid on it. Keep the steam in there to let them cook. So I'm going to bring this heat down just a little bit to just about a simmer. And I'm going to put the lid on it. Now I'm not going to forget about it because I'm going to have to come back here in a few minutes and stir this again, probably about every 3 minutes. Some of you may be asking the question, what is the ratio of liquid to grits? Now this is a general rule of thumb. It's not the gospel truth. It's not a hardcore fact that you have to do it this way. Some people are comfortable using a ratio of 3 parts of liquid to 1 part grits, or a 4 to 1, but I think, and after cooking grits hundreds of times, the ratio of liquid to grits would be a 5 to 1. In other words, if I have 5 parts of liquid, 5 cups of liquid, I will use 1 cup of grits. Here I have 10 cups of liquid, I use 2 cups of grits. And I think that's going to give you a creamy, consistent bowl of grits every single time. So we're going to stir this a little bit more. So someone's probably asking this question, well, how long do I cook the grits? And I've seen a lot of videos where people say, well, you cook your grits 5 minutes or 10 minutes. One, do not ever follow the directions on the can of or package of grits because they're generally wrong. It's hard to answer that question because my container that I'm using to cook in may transfer heat different than yours. Your stove may be higher than mine. You may have the lid on longer or shorter than I do. You may stir more than I do. And all these things affect the heat, the transfer of heat into the grits. So how long do we cook it? I can't tell you it's 7 minutes and 49 seconds or 10 minutes. It just depends. And this is one thing about cooking. Sometimes you just have to experiment and use common sense. I know most of the time when I cook grits, it's going to take at least 15 minutes. If I cook stone ground grits, I'm looking at probably 30 to 40 minutes. So there's no firm pat answer, how long should I cook my grits? So let's check on these here. They've been probably about 15 minutes now. Everything's looking really good. So how do I know if they're ready? Well, there's only one way to find out, and that's to test them. And I'm looking for a couple things here. And this is something I don't see on very many videos. They cook the grits, they tell you how to do it, but they never tell you this most important step. You must check the texture and the taste or the flavor of the grits. If you're a cook, you test and taste every time. So I've allowed these to cool a little bit. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm checking for the texture. Are they the texture that I want? These are absolutely creamy, a good consistency. And the second thing I'm tasting or checking would be the flavor. The flavor is good, but I'd like to have a little bit more flavor. So what I'm going to do over here is add a little bit more chicken base. Not much, just a little bit. I'm going to add a little more salt. So I'm going to add a little bit more butter. Things are always better with butter. And then we're going to add some pepper. So a lot of times people will put salt in, they'll taste it, and they'll say, oh, that doesn't have enough salt in it, so they'll add a little more salt. And well, as it continues to cook, the salt continues to dissolve, and then all of a sudden there's too much salt. So add a little bit of salt, let it dissolve, and then taste it again. Okay, just a little free tip right there. It's nice and creamy. Let those cool just a minute. Now this is the point I determine, do I want these to be a little thinner? If I do, I'm going to add some more cream. If I want them to be creamier, I'd add more cream or more liquid to it. More flavor, I'd add more seasoning. So this is the time to make all of your adjustments. So let's see how they taste now. Good texture. And the flavor is really, really good. So there we have it, a delicious bowl of Southern cooked grits. Thank you for watching the video. Do me a little favor right now. Reach down there and hit the like button, share it with your friends, subscribe, and I'll see you the next time on All Things Food.